Welcome into the latest episode of the 5 Reasons Podcast. I'm Ethan Skolnick here, as always, with Chris Whittingham. Now that you have found us, make sure that you hit the subscribe or follow button. That way you'll get all of our old episodes as well as all of our new episodes as soon as they post. We also have 12 other podcasts in our network, so check all of those out. The best way to find all of them is to type in 5 Reasons Sports. Whether you have iTunes, Podbean, Google Play, just type in 5 Reasons Sports, and all of our podcasts are now grouped together. So it's an easy way for you to consume us. So one of the things we've done here on the podcast that has been popular has been our Heat Stories series. Check out our library. You'll find episodes we've done with Jason Jackson, Eric Reid, Tony Fiorentino, Ronnie Rothstein, Udonis Haslem, Mario Chalmers, Brian Grant, and more. And today we're going to do kind of a combination because this is somebody who did play for the Heat, even though it was relatively brief, but is still with the Heat and is moving into a new role this year. He is the new television analyst for the Miami Heat, John Crotty. John, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Ethan. Thanks, Chris.
It's good to have you here. We're going to take you back a little bit before we get into kind of what your plans are as an analyst this year, sitting alongside Eric Reid. And I want to go all the way back to Virginia because I think people who listen to you with Mike Inglis, see you on television with Jax and others, don't realize you were really good. Like, I think they see you these days. They're like,
I do Crotty. I knew you were an amazing basketball player.
You were not alive.
Thanks.
You were not alive,
Whit,
actually.
Yeah, Whit, you're getting much more love than Ethan right now. But I hear you. Look, the way I look at it, though, Ethan, is we all come into the NBA. Most of us, anyway, have been stars in college and have had a huge impact in college. And my college career was so much fun, and it was out, a lot of highs and obviously some lows too. But I was blessed to be highly recruited. I was actually McDonald's All-American, so I was ranked one of the top 25 high school basketball players coming out, and that was a real eye opener for me, and put me in a level where I was playing against the best in the country, which in today's world, a lot of those guys would have rolled into the NBA. So it's a different time, but it gave me a lot of confidence going into college. I was recruited by everybody. My top 5 schools were University of North Carolina, where my father played, Notre Dame. I'm Irish Catholic from New Jersey, so it's like sacrilege not to at least seriously consider Notre Dame, Virginia, Villanova, and Stanford. And I'll tell you, I had a phenomenal recruiting experience, but Virginia was just the best fit for me from an academic, from a basketball standpoint, where I could step in and be a factor and play in a very competitive league, and then socially just to have a great time and really enjoy being a true student athlete.
Now, you are still the all-time assist leader for Virginia. I think people who are not familiar with what the ACC was at that time, what were some of the players you played with in that conference?
Yeah, it was outstanding in terms of the competition, and from my perspective, that's what I really enjoyed and thrived on. From a point guard standpoint, night in, night out, I was playing against some of the best players in the country. If it was a Chris Corchiani, who a lot of people here in Miami are familiar with, who's from Hialeah, Miami Lakes, and then at NC State with Rodney Monroe, who had also played the point. See, a couple of years younger than me, who wound up playing against Kenny Anderson at Georgia Tech as part of the Lethal Weapon 3 with Brian Oliver and Dennis Scott. At North Carolina, there was a guy who was highly recruited in King Rice, who wound up not being a tremendously big name, but was a McDonald's All-American and recruited to play both football and basketball at one point. And he was in UNC at the time. It was a very, very competitive group, and it was I'm forgetting Maryland, Walt Williams, the Wizard. It was just a lot of really good players that every night you had to bring your best.
Okay, so you move into the NBA in the 92-93 season. You're on a team that has John Stockton on it. What is that experience like of being introduced into the NBA?
Well, you're glossing over the fact that I had to play a year in the minor league, which really gave me another whole perspective coming from the ACC and then having to play in a minor league for a year, which was tough. And really, was a bit of an ego check and had to really grind and become a better player. Played an NBA style of basketball for a year in a place called Greenville, South Carolina, in a minor league, and I got a chance to play in the next year in a summer league with the Utah Jazz and wound up making the team and just really competed at a high level because of my desire to get in. And to be able to sign, it was a 1-year deal with the Utah Jazz and come in and play with arguably the best point guard to ever play the game was an amazing experience. First, from the standpoint of competition. I mean, I was going against them every day, banging heads and, learning from them as well as trying to compete with them. And then getting to, really play with Karl Malone as well, who was arguably the best power forward to ever play the game. And the ability to run pick and roll with this guy and what he was able to do offensively to make the team and better, and to really, from a point guard perspective, challenge me to put the ball in different positions was an outstanding experience.
John, give us one Stockton story, one that sticks out to you, the one that you either.
I mean, there's so many. There's so many. So my first week with the Utah Jazz, I was guarding Stockton, and I'm the proverbial hyper rookie who's doing everything he can to try to be competitive and stand out, and I'm picking him up and guarding him the full length of the floor and just trying to wear him out, and his patience level is really low at this point up with me, and he takes me to the left wing, fakes to the baseline, and winds up coming back hard to the middle. And I literally run right into Karl Malone on a classic pick and roll, and I'm knocked out. I get knocked out. Karl Malone's, one of his really good friends was a guy named Delaney Rudd, and Delaney basically was replaced by me, which had nothing to do with me, but, he wasn't really too happy with me at the time either. So between the two of them, they had a great chuckle with me being knocked out on the floor, and I vaguely recall as I came up out of my gray mist, Karl standing over me, giving me one of the welcome to the NBA young man type moments before he stepped over me and ran down the floor. So I remember getting into it with Stockton as well during practice one time. I just let, my frustration kind of boil over, and we got into it, and Karl actually held us both apart, and he was kind of laughing because we were both like two little, bantam roosters, and he's this, gigantic human being kind of holding us apart while we're swinging at each other and can't touch each other. And but we wound up coming in together and really becoming better friends, particularly as I came back later in my career and played for the Jazz once again about 8 years later, where we were, more peers at that point versus being, older guy and rookie.
So those two guys, as you said, some people think Stockton, maybe not the best point guard ever, but certainly in the conversation of the top 3 to 5. It depends sort of, how you view Magic, but I think most people may put him first. But Stockton has a bunch of those records, whether it's steals or assists, etc.
Right. All-time assists, all-time steals. I think that, arguably the thing is championships, right? And that's where Magic and, gets the nod a lot.
And then you mentioned Karl Malone, arguably the best power forward ever. I think basically that conversation is him or Tim Duncan. Again, depending on whether you view Tim as a center or a 4. But those two guys, I'm just curious because they came so close to winning a couple of championships. Obviously, Jordan stopped that both times. But how do you think they would fare in today's game? Because I think when we hear about Stockton, some people say, well, how does he guard Westbrook? Or we hear about Karl and we say, Nowitzki style 4. How would both of them fare today?
Honestly, I think they would both be better. Look, Stockton, I mean, is as athletic as anybody, and that, again, a bit of a unfortunate situation where people didn't give him credit for that. He was an amazing athlete in terms of speed, in terms of lateral quickness, that's why he leads the league in steals all time. I mean, he had great vision and anticipation skills to see what was going to happen a play or two in advance. And then with that physical package he had, I mean, look, you talk about athleticism, how about endurance in terms of the amount of games that both these guys played? They never missed games. They didn't take games off like today's player does. And to them, it would be an insult to go sit on the bench. But I think they compare very well because the game was much more physical. There was a lot more restriction in terms of if you drove, a guy could at times lean on you and put his forearm on you and to slow you down, where in today's game of movement and flow, being the skilled players that both of them were, despite the size of Karl Malone, he was incredibly skilled as a shooter, stepping out from the basket, they would thrive. I really do. I believe that.
Do you think that players like, we were having a conversation amongst us here on the Five Reasons Network, and we just like to shoot the breeze on a bunch of topics. And one of the things that we were talking about is what would Shaq at his prime look like in today's game? Where does he fit in, and where does someone whose skills are only are close to the rim fit in the modern game? And while Karl Malone could step out a little bit more, he's still someone who is an inside player. Do you think that those guys and that skill set still has room in the league, because we just don't see it very much anymore?
Well, we don't see it because no one's that good at it. I mean, both those guys you mentioned, Shaq and Karl Malone, would be incredibly dominant now and would force people to have to guard them inside, which would create so much more space for the rest of their teammates. But, look, a free-flowing game helps the better skilled players is really how I look at it. And both those guys were dominant in such a way that they created double, even triple teams at times. So I think they both do extremely well. Shaq, just in terms of, you give him the ball, they got a double team inside. He, particularly early in his career, ran the floor extremely well. Later in his career was slower and to me got bigger. But, he was an absolute freak of nature, the way he could run and athletically make plays. And, Karl, when I got to play with him, had developed, when he came in the league, he couldn't make a free throw. And when I played with him, he became one of the best mid-range jump shooters in the league, a lot like Patrick Ewing did towards the end of his career. And they were so good at it. So I think both those guys are that talented. They're also so physically dominant. And that's what's so hard to do in this league, because there's so many equally strong and athletic guys. You have to rely on your skill set to last a long period of time. Those guys had the strength and the bulk and speed in some ways with a skill set.
We'll get back to our episode here with John Crotty in a second, but Chris and I have been telling you about BetDSI and what a great deal it is. If you've been listening to our podcast, all you got to do is go to betdsi.com and type in the promo code Reason101. That's Reason101, and you get your initial deposit matched up to $2,500. I don't know if you want to put in quite that much. I was a little bit of a chicken, but I should have put in more, because I would have gotten that bonus matched, and then I'd be gambling with more right now than I actually am. But we've talked a lot about the NFL lines there, but they've got over-unders futures for all of the NBA teams. Where do the Heat sit right now, Chris?
The Miami over-under right now is 41.5. So basically, you're betting them to be either 500 or below, or over 500. That's literally the bet that you have in front of you at 41.5. And I got to say, as much as I have occasionally been the negative one on the Heat, and
oh my God, you're going over. I
constantly make fun of them for being the 43 and 39 team. They're going to get to over 500, Ethan, which right now is at minus 116 on betdsi.com. They've got to go over. I mean, you're bringing back the same team. The East doesn't look that much better. You mean to tell me, Ethan, that the Heat are not going to go over 500? They've got to go over 500. So I'm going to take the over at betdsi.com. I like a few others, including my personal favorite, San Antonio, over 45.5. I mean, the Spurs added DeMar DeRozan they over a team that didn't have Kawhi Leonard last year, and they're not going to get to 50 wins. That's like all Greg Popovich does. They're going to get to 50 wins. So those would be my two personal preferences over at BetDSI.com. And again, go to BetDSI.com, get your deposit matched up to $2,500 by using the promo code REASON101.
Let's take you to the Heat. You played one season with the Miami Heat. This was after Pat Riley had taken over. He built the core of the team with Zoe, with Tim, with Dan Marley, with P.J. Brown, with Vashawn Leonard, a core that would have a lot of success over that period of time. And one of the things that kept happening was they kept changing the backup point guard over that period of time. You got a year, Murdoch got a year, Terry Porter got a year. So your first introduction to a Pat Riley practice, how did that go?
It was a bit shocking. I mean, I always prided myself on being, really one of the best fit guys on the team, someone who, could last a long period of time. But I'll back it up, Ethan, and go to the tryout that I had actually with the team, where they had me come in and they ran me full court, back and forth, over and over again, making layups, then having to shoot pull-up jump shots, quick 2 shots, free throws to catch your breath, and then right over to spot shooting and running, everything with a high emphasis on conditioning as well as execution. And that was the way we practiced. It was amazing how physical the practices were. The defensive side of the ball got even more emphasis than the offensive side. When we ran drills regularly, the loser in the competition between the offense and the defense would run. That just doesn't happen in the NBA anymore. It just doesn't happen. The edge that we had in practice, a lot of the physicality regarding anyone going in the basket was fouled. The practices were in the middle of the season, 2.5, 3 hours long. A typical practice with most teams, and again, I played for 7 different organizations, would be, maybe 45 minutes of intensity with some, before or after walkthrough. And, I'm including actual on the floor work time. We would sit and listen to coach. He would rank everybody defensively before we even stepped on the floor from the game before. He would discuss the game before and then what we were trying to accomplish in the practice. Guys would typically be on the floor 45 minutes before we were even supposed to be. You had to get up a certain amount of shots every day individually. It was a tremendous physical and mental commitment to play for the Heat, but I thrived in it. I really enjoyed how hard he pushed everybody. And from my standpoint, that's how I like to play. And I think the team really showed, you could see how he wore on other teams throughout the course of a game. It was almost freedom to play in a normal game against another team rather than to have to play in the tackle football practices that we had on a daily basis.
Can you describe what those practices were like?
I mean, regular one-on-one type defensive drills where you're pounding into guys. You're meeting them as they're coming across the lane. The coach would have the ball one wing, the offensive players on the other wing. If I'm defense, my head's underneath the basket. They yell, go. The guy comes running across. I'm hitting him as hard as I can with my chest, preventing him from getting to the block to catch the ball. We're pounding on each other. Eventually, the guy's going to catch the ball with his back to the basket with me. He's going to back me down and turn and try to shoot and go live one-on-one. I mean, try doing that for a half an hour, over and over and over again. And the physicality of what you're doing there, just to break it down in a one-on-one drill. And we would do that regularly where we would run offense against defense. And, the defense would meet the offense at half court. It was just a very, very clutch and grab, no fouls called type atmosphere with the competition being ratcheted up. You just don't see that in most NBA practices. The coaches aware of everything going on, calling out mistakes, accountability at the highest level, making every possession, just seems so important, even on a practice scenario.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you about was the tryout process. Now, I can't imagine there are a lot of tryouts now, just between a combination of summer league and G League, and now more of sort of an infrastructure of minor league basketball, that it doesn't really happen as much anymore. But can you describe what trying out for an NBA team is like?
So I came in a scenario where I came over from Italy. They had an injury. Gary Grant had a back injury, and they were trying to figure out who they were going to bring in to back up Tim Hardaway. I was in great shape because I'd just come over from Italy because of this opportunity, and they wanted to test me, and I hadn't been playing for about a week when I came back. So, when I tell you run full lengths of the court, it doesn't sound like much, but just run as fast as you can, 6 times up and down the court, laying in the basketball, and then 2 free throws, and then 6 times as fast as you can up and down the court, pull up jump shots. Then they pull you over on the half court and you're running one-on-one drills with 2 different coaches guarding you. You have to get open, catch the ball, and make a move with them beating on you and hanging on you. It's a super intense workout. And, they wanted to see what kind of shape I was in, whether I was going to be able to step in right away and be a factor.
So you mentioned Tim Hardaway, and there are a lot of Tim Hardaway stories out there. Going against him in practice every day for a year, how much did Tim talk to you?
Well, the thing about Tim was, and again, this was what's kind of funny, is my first 4 years in the NBA, my first technical foul I ever got, I was in Utah and playing Golden State, and Tim and I got into a little scuffle. Every time I played against Tim previous to my Heat experience, we tend to get into a little bit of a scuffle because I would be, trying to pick him up full court and wear him down. And, he just would, for whatever reason, didn't like what I was doing. And we literally would get a technical foul every time we played. And so when I was coming into the situation, I was kind of scratching my head saying, well, this could be a long situation for me if Tim and I aren't going to get along, because to your point, I'm going to be playing against him every single day, right? And he's one of the go-to guys and leaders of the team. And the night before I joined the team, Tim called me one-on-one to welcome me to the team, to put me kind of at ease and just say, hey, we're appreciative. I'm glad you're coming in. We need help. We need someone to handle the ball, and we think you can, make a difference. And, really it showed a lot of leadership by him, particularly based upon, to me, a little bit of the pass there and maturity. He was a guy who competed hard every day. He was the heart and soul of that team, along with Alonzo Mourning. He was the guy who would take the big shot when it mattered. Huge talker, but that's what he used to motivate himself and to get everybody else playing at a higher level. That was his juice, if you will, to kind of light the fire every day.
Here's how I evaluated that team, and I got to say that was the first team that I ever covered extensively in any way. I came down here to cover sports full time in '96, covered you guys a little bit, then moved to the Dolphins in '97. So I was around that team some, and then a lot the next 3 years. And tell me if I'm right on these characterizations. I always viewed Zoe as the guy who would run through a wall for Pat, because he always repeated everything Pat said in the press conferences. He would use certain Riley expressions like adversity introduces a man to himself. Like I could parrot these 20 years later. Whereas Tim, who was the guy who would run through a wall to run into Pat, that the way we perceived it was that Zoe was always kind of on Pat's side on these things, and Tim was always fighting it a little bit, but eventually they would come together. Was that an accurate characterization of how that thing worked?
Yeah, I think that was pretty accurate. I mean, I think Zoe came down from a situation in, Charlotte where, he wanted to be a star, even more a star in the league, and he wanted to compete, in the playoffs and go further. And he saw with Pat somebody that could take him there. So he was willing to, at times, blindly follow him and particularly early on and do what he said. And it resulted in that type of situation. And he, was obviously handsomely rewarded for being the best player he could be and to do it at a high level. I think Tim was coming from an incredibly successful situation in Golden State, and he had hurt his knee. So this was Tim's, was kind of coming back, if you will. I think some people were skeptical and they were, they really misjudged the fact that he was going to come back even stronger. And, he had an edge too. And yeah, I mean, I think, look, Coach was super defensive minded at times, and I think Tim probably wanted to do some things on the offensive side where he could be even more free to do what he wanted, although he had incredible freedom. And yeah, I think that's accurate, Ethan. I really do. But I think what Coach Riley and the coaching staff did do was they made everybody feel like they had a role on the team and was valuable. And I think that is a really important part of having a successful team. Respecting everyone wherever they stood on the food chain, if you will, and get them to feel confident and contributing in a way that, first of all, they're helping in whatever position they're in, or they're ready to step in should something happen in a long NBA season from an injury.
All right, so you guys have a very successful season. You win 61 games. You're one of the favorites in the Eastern Conference. You win the Atlantic Division. You get Orlando in the first round, and then you get the Knicks. And in that series, you had one of the stranger circumstances that I've witnessed, and I was actually sitting baseline, so it happened right in front of me, which was P.J. Brown, who's one of the most mild-mannered people you'll ever meet, and Charlie Ward, also one of the most mild-mannered people you ever meet, somehow getting a tussle under the basket where P.J. throws Charlie Ward. What was your vantage point for that and sort of the rest of the series, which is one of the crazier series in Heat history?
Yeah, it was an amazing series, period, from any historical perspective. I mean, it was, you had the whole backdrop of Coach Riley leaving New York to come to Miami. You had a really interesting dynamic where you had Pat Ewing and Alonzo Mourning, who were friends, but also, and graduates of Georgetown, but also wanted to assert one another's, authority and teams on top of the other. You had really competitive guys on both teams who really played a physical, hard-nosed style of defense that, Coach Riley really had worked on with the Knicks as well as Miami. So it made for a really interesting brew of competition and competitive spirit of both teams going at it. And look, I was sitting on the bench at the time watching this. It was on the far side of the floor. It was during a free throw where Charlie Ward basically chop blocked P.J. Brown right at the knee on a free throw attempt, and P.J. picked him up and kind of threw him into the first row of seating And all this happened in front of the Knick bench. And, this was sort of the blessing part of it from our perspective, because everybody came off the Knick bench to try to spill out onto the floor, and it's automatic suspension to do that. And look, we were blessed. If it happened in front of our bench, it probably would have been us that had the repercussions. And there were so many guys that spilled out onto the floor that the league had to stage the suspensions of the various players. And it certainly helped us. I mean, we were able to win that game, which made it 3-2 in New York's favor. We went back up to New York, and I'll never remember all my years, 11 years of the NBA and some bigger games. I'll never remember the amount of cameras being greater than they were when we got off the bus in New York to our hotel. It was like something out of a movie. When we came off that bus, everybody was waiting there, and they had just ruled out P.J. Brown for the rest of the series. And, the tension and the pressure was high as we were preparing to go into Madison Square Garden for Game 6. It was a huge game, and Coach Riley gave us a great, motivation type speech along with the chalk talk, and we went out there and got a great win. And they were chanting "Pat the Rat" the whole time. It was a lot of fun. I mean, it really was. It's why you play the game. And then to come back to our fans for Game 7 in our building and ultimately win the series was just a highlight to the year. We ran into a Bulls team in the next round. It was, with Jordan and Pippen that were in the midst of that 6 championship run. And they were a handful. I mean, let's just put it that way. And we lose 4-1 in that series. But, look, I think Coach Riley and the staff got the most out of us that year to win 60 games, to compete the way we did. And, everyone played at such a high level. It was a lot of fun.
I imagine this would be mortifying to a lot of our listeners, or perhaps even you, but Knicks Heat kind of predates me a little bit. I did not get to enjoy the splendor that was those series. So from your perspective, what was the intensity of the games like? What was it like to actually play or sit so close to a game that is played at that level?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, Chris, because it doesn't appear the same anymore. That everyone's hugging each other now before NBA games, which is kind of ridiculous. These games, people genuinely didn't like each other, and it was frowned upon basically from the top levels down, and you weren't really comrades with these guys until, the off season, if they were your friends. If they were your friends, once you step between the lines, you kind of set that aside. And if they were former teammates, you were really going at each other. So the feeling was much more so than your normal game. There was a, win at all costs type of mentality. There was true vitriol from the fan bases, and it trickled down obviously to a lot of the personalities and the players and the coaching staffs, etc. at times, particularly in those series. I'm blessed that I'm the lucky potion, guys. That was the year that we were able to beat the Knicks. So,
yeah, the only one. Yeah, the next 3. Well, the amazing thing to me about it, John, is the thing that doesn't get talked about enough is those 4 series used every game. They used every single game. All 4 of those series, starting with the one you played in, and then the next 3 went the distance. Whether it was 5 games or 7 games, they all went the distance.
Right.
That's incredible.
No, you're right. It is incredible, but it goes also to the competitive nature of how the games were played. Then the physical nature of it too. It was very difficult to run out and blow teams out as much. I would also say, I think the way we played, we had to compete and play at a high level defensively. We weren't typically going to blow people outright from an offensive standpoint. Points at times we came to a struggle to get, but from stopping people, there was typically a time in a game where we would hold people scoreless for a long period of time and make our move.
All right, so one more question here before we get to the broadcasting and everything that you're doing and are going to do this season. You mentioned the Bulls. You saw them up close, again, peak of their powers. Take that Bulls team, put it in today's era, put them across the court from Golden State. How does that look?
Or even the Big 3 Heat.
Or even the Big 3 Heat. We can do both.
I mean, look, the whole era thing to me is always tricky, but that's an outstanding Bulls team. And I'll tell you what made them so good and why they could compete against anybody, including today's group, is their defense. They had 3 guys out front in Pippen, Michael Jordan, and Ron Harper, who could switch every screen up front and were equally as good in terms of having length. They were all about, 6'6" or longer with very good lateral quickness. And it made it very difficult to be able to create any kind of pick and roll action out front, any kind of down screens they could switch. They played extremely well as a unit in terms of understanding their roles. Jordan was just such a competitive guy that he would bring everybody up to his level of focus, drew so much of the defense. He was able to find shooters, make everyone on the floor better. So he's your ultimate closer. Again, I talk about, everyone thinks of them as being Jordan in scoring. Their defense, to me, is what really made them special. And Steph Curry, and again, let's go back. The rules, right? I mean, you could put your hands on people. You could be more aggressive with them on the perimeter. You can't do that to Steph Curry now. A guy like Steph Curry, it's a lot harder for him to create the space and have room to be able to make plays if Michael Jordan is hanging on you and can put his hands on you and slow you down with length. And that's the way the game used to be played. It's not played like that anymore.
You would not bet on the stock market. You would not invest in stocks unless you knew something about the stocks you were investing in, right? So why would you bet on games unless you had the analytics? If you knew where the public was going with their money so you could make an informed decision. We're taking a look right now at this Dolphins-Bengals game coming up this Sunday. Obviously, Dolphins fans depressed. The team's 3-1, but they just got trashed in New England. They're playing a very good Cincinnati team on the road. Ryan Tannehill doesn't play particularly well on the road. Adam Gase doesn't coach well on the road. Man, I'm depressing you more. Anyway, Chris, what is the BetQL app, which you can download for free on Google Play for Android or iTunes for Apple? What is the BetQL app telling you about the Dolphins and the Bengals?
Not much better than what you were saying, Ethan. They right now have the public is betting this game 50-50, roughly thereabouts, at Bengals -6. So this line has been set well in terms of the betting public, but their rating on the game is that they think that Cincinnati should be favored by 11 and the Bengals are favored by 6. So if you followed their advice, you should be hammering the Cincinnati Bengals to not only win but cover the 6-point spread. They think that the Dolphins, particularly away from home, are not going to do well in this game. The line started at 5.5. I imagine some action came in on the Bengals after the Dolphins' performance against the Patriots. Bengals winning away from home in Atlanta. This is a really good Bengals team. The Dolphins are up against it, particularly in the minds of BetQL. And it's not just that game. They have you covered on the Red River Shootout this weekend between Texas and Oklahoma. And depending on your in-app purchases, can take a look at any game in either the college football, the NFL schedule. They've got baseball in there as well if you want to bet the Major League Baseball playoffs. So plenty of information available on BetQL. Again, go to the Apple App Store or go to the Google Play Store if you're on Android and download the BetQL app.
Well, that's a good transition here as we move into our final part, which is your broadcasting career. And you've been on the radio now for a few years, along with Mike English. You've also been in the studio with Will Manso. You're moving into a different role this year with Eric Reid, so congratulations on that. And what we want to talk to you about is just what your approach is going to be to that, because I know radio broadcasting is different from television broadcasting in terms of the picture that you're trying to paint, and you're going to be in front of people every day. So have you thought much about how you want to handle this this season and going forward?
Just trying to be myself. The reality is been doing the radio for 12 years. I've been doing studio TV for 6. I've been part of a lot of different features and things during the playoff runs for the team from a TV perspective. So I feel like I've kind of put my time in and worked my way up to this spot. But, I know I have big shoes to fill, and I'm excited about it. It's sort of the next challenge for me. I love the game. I love talking about the game. And to me, what I'm going to bring to the broadcast, my goal is to try to bring the player perspective. How do players look at the different situations out on the floor, try to relay that to the fan and tell the how and the why. Look, it's sometimes everyone gets excited about the big dunk, but how did the guy get open to make the dunk? What was the play? What's the reason for that? And that to me is what I will try to bring to the broadcast, and then to try to teach things, the subtleties, the layers that are going on. I call it the game within the game of, trying to get open and what that entails and the different plays that teams are running, and, either how to get open offensively or defensively, how to combat what the other team's doing. These are the strengths that the other team does. This is how you try to combat it, and then track, different players and talk about their strengths and weaknesses and point out what makes them so good and try to give the fans just another layer. And if I can compare them to guys that we've talked about, whether it's an Alonzo Mourning or Tim Hardaway, or, I've been fortunate to play with a lot of Hall of Fame type guys, whether it's John Stockton or Gary Payton or Karl Malone. I mean, I've played with a lot of all-stars that I can kind of refer to, that maybe compare or match up with some of these players and talk about, those types of similarities or differences. I think that kind of adds an interesting feature to the broadcast.
Yeah, and one of the things that's most interesting to me, transitioning from radio, is that radio is the play-by-play man's medium, just because it's so much picture painting and the game moves so quickly, particularly in basketball. You notice that particularly in the playoffs, how, the play-by-play man on his own is struggling to tell you what's happening just strictly based off the pace of the game. But television is the color guy's medium. It's much more about, you have a lot more freedom to talk over plays, because when you're doing television, you don't have to say, Wade passes the ball to Tyler Johnson to James Johnson to Whiteside. Like there isn't that sort of constant talking. And so with that kind of extra freedom, how do you think you'll either adjust or it'll end up changing you?
Does that mean I get to speak more, Chris? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying.
Right? Inglis, Inglis has been keeping me down all these years.
Such a hog, that Mike Inglis.
That's right. Well, Inglis on the officials. That's our running joke. We give Mike Eric. Look, I've quite as hard on.
You learn a lot. Yeah, you learn a lot from every medium, and what the radio does is it teaches you to get your point across in a very succinct, timely manner, because you only have between when the ball comes through the basket and is inbounded to the guy dribbling over half court and initiating the offense, when you got to let it go back to the play-by-play guy. So, I understand how to try to get things across. You're right. I've heard that too, Chris, in terms of it's a better medium for an analyst, and I look forward to that. I think the opportunity that for me will be on a lot of the replays, that we can point out things that people might not have really understood or picked up, again, as to the how and the why things are happening out on the floor, trends that are going on. If I can be predictive to what potentially could happen, or just provide that, what I would call second layer of analysis of, this is why this is happening, and this guy's getting open over and over again. And I hope to bring that, and people will learn and say, okay, now I get that, and they find that, the things I'm saying, while I may not be talking as much as Eric Reid, the things I'm saying are worthwhile, and they're able to get some value from that in the broadcast.
I know a lot of this has to come naturally, and a lot of the best phrases and expressions do. They come organically. I know a lot of Eric's have come organically. Is there something you've got warmed up, though, for the TV audience that maybe you didn't bring out?
Yeah, look, to me, that's really more the play-by-play play-by-play guys, situation. What's interesting about my role, Ethan, is really I'm the guy that has to show restraint. When the dunk happens, you're not going to ever hear me. It'll be Eric on the call. But look, I will definitely be showing emotion. I love yelling at a crusher or something like that when I see one. And I enjoy the game so much. I'm excited to be on the broadcast. And look, this team and this organization, they're always competitive. And I get to talk to a lot of other broadcasters in different meetings we have and breakouts and such. And, everyone really admires, our organization for the way they take care of people. And from my perspective, I'm excited to be kind of the homegrown guy who's been developed and come up through the ranks, and now, get a chance to be part of the call.
All right, final one here before we let you go, because I think one thing people don't realize is you can have a little fun too. I remember the segments that used to be done on, I believe it was Zaslow show with Birdman. Give us one before we let you go. I want one Birdman story before we let Crotty leave this podcast.
Coming on the broadcast and interviewing him and acting like a WWE character in terms of, shouting at us and turning and saying, this is not Chris Anderson. So we're saying, okay, this is okay, Birdman. He said, no, this isn't Birdman. And we're like, well, who are you? This is Birdzilla tonight. I am Birdzilla. And this is my house, and this is what I did today. And, we're scratching our heads saying, okay, man, go ahead. Just go ahead, have your way, yelling around like Randy Macho Man Savage out there, just going off on people.
We want you to call yourself Crotzilla on the air this year.
Crotzilla, at least once.
At least once. We'll know that's the 5 Reasons Sports shout out. Well, John, we appreciate you taking the time. We're happy for you to get this opportunity. We'll see you down at the arena. John, thanks for joining us, and hope we can do it again, during the season at some point.
I love it. Thanks, Ethan. Chris, I appreciate it. Anytime you guys need me. All the best.